Thanks for joining us on The Real Story. I'm Jen Bernstein. Well, both of Connecticut's tribes have decided to reopen on June 1st. That's against the governor's request. I want to bring in our first guest this morning, Rodney Butler, who is the Mashantucket Pequot Tribal Chairman. Rodney, thanks for joining me this morning.
Hey, Jen, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be back.
All right, so you are a sovereign nation. You're independent from Connecticut, so you can make your own rules here. What led up to the decision to open early?
Well, I mean, I think we need to clarify opening early and what that really means. And so when you think about the reopening phases that Connecticut, Rhode Island, Massachusetts are seeing, they're all being phased in different ways. And so what we're simply doing is phasing primarily in accordance with the guidelines that the state has laid out for malls, for office buildings, for restaurants, and the like, because that's essentially what we are. We're primarily, when you look at the footprint of Foxwoods, we're a small city. And so, you know, we're opening the same way that a downtown Mystic would be open in that sense. And we're just doing it in a very, very large building.
So the governor had said during one of his press conferences last week that it's very risky to open the casinos. He says that by opening, you're essentially putting the people who are going to the casinos at risk and even the region at risk. So when you heard him say that, because I know you do watch his press conferences, what was your reaction?
Well, I do. And obviously, we're a community first. And I always want to make sure people realize that. I mean, it's the Mashantucket Pequot Tribal Nation. I have a nation of very close family members that I have to be concerned about their health and well-being as well. And so simply opening a casino isn't done haphazardly. We're thinking about the health of our elders that live just around the corner, our many family members that work there, and as well as our extended family members, because that's the way we look at our team members as extended family. And so, you know, we're focused on the highest health and safety standards, not just in the region, but in the country. And when you look at what other industries are doing, we've made sure that we are exceeding all those regulations that are out there now for businesses that are open or are opening in these phases.
Yeah, tell me what a reopening looks like. What did you invest into health and safety protocols, and what are you going to be doing in the casino to keep people safe?
Yeah, that's a great question, Jen, because I think that's what people are having a hard time understanding when they think about reopening and reopening early and the safety concerns that they're focused on. They think of it as Foxwoods from what they remember, right? And yes, Foxwoods is grand. It's 9 million square feet. There's a lot of excitement and entertainment going on. But that's not what we're talking about in the reopening phases. We're talking about opening up the first phase, where it's simply the Grand Pequot and Great Cedar Casino, limited grab-and-go restaurants, spacing of the gaming floor with slot machines, where you see one slot machine that's on, the second one that's next to you is off with chairs pulled away. The gaming tables will have only 3 people at a blackjack table, where typically there's 7. And then they'll also have a plexiglass shield in between the players and in between the dealers. Everyone walking into the building will have to go through a thermal scanner that will check their temperature. And if they're over a certain degree, they'll get pulled aside for a second testing. And then if there continue to be elevated temperatures, they'll be asked to leave the property. Everyone on the property, employees and patrons alike, will be wearing face masks. And so these are all the things that we're doing. That it's not the same old Foxwoods. It's going to be different, and we realize that it's going to be different for some time. I mean, all the great entertainment that we're known for, there's no entertainment on the books for months, and there's no timeline for that to say when it's going to come back online. Conferences and conventions, those are all put off for months as well.
Yeah, talking about a timeline on things. Do you have, your different phases, just like the state does, of what you're hoping to accomplish and what you're hoping to get open? I know you just said, though, that concert venues, those are all to be determined at this point. But have you looked at the summer and possibly opening up other things?
Yeah, well, obviously, I mean, we've added, exciting things like the zip line and stuff like that. They're outdoors, and we'll look to open that sooner rather than later. But when we're looking at the actual footprint of Foxwoods, for us, similar to what you're saying for malls, it's really about capacity. And so the guidelines that came out yesterday for indoor malls was a 50% occupancy capacity maximum for any retail establishment. We're operating at about 25 to 30% of capacity. And so we feel like that's a safe place to start. And then we'll monitor that with the state's guidelines, with the CDC guidelines, and with the guidelines of our chief medical officer as we move forward. And we're moving forward very, very cautiously and making sure we're taking everything into consideration.
What about certain employees? I know that we here at Fox 61 had spoken with a Mohegan Sun employee, not one of your employees, who had a pre-existing condition, and he was really concerned about going back and was worried that he was going to lose his job if he didn't go back. So how are you deciding? You're saying you're going to operate at 25% capacity. How are you deciding what employees go back, and have you addressed some of those concerns?
Yeah, that's the difficult part, right? So when we're operating at 25% capacity, that means you only need about 25% of your workforce. And so we are starting with a skeleton crew. We started calling people back late last week, early this week. And the response has been overwhelmingly excited about coming back, which was really good to hear. I think people are ready to come out, and we've walked them through our procedures, and they feel comfortable about it as well. But there's many that don't. And we're looking at options for them. We have a lot of union partners at Foxwoods, and we're talking with labor and trying to see what's best for their members and what's best for our team members at large. So we're looking at options. Unfortunately, our employees, well, fortunately, I'd say, our employees fall under the state's unemployment system, and so they are benefiting from that and from the additional $600 a week from the federal government. But there's no clarity right now if people don't feel comfortable coming back, and you can hear that in the press conferences, whether or not it's going to be held against them and their unemployment is going to be terminated.
Yeah, that is a big question. And we do know that there's high unemployment in the areas where the casinos are, and that's just because obviously a lot of employees live there that work for you all. I'm curious to know, what's the financial hit been like because of COVID-19 for you all?
Well, I think the point that you just made on unemployment is so critically important. And, I made some press as of late responding to some, I'd say, irresponsible comments by people that shouldn't be making them about the lack of importance of the casinos to the state's economy and to the employment numbers. And you saw the unemployment numbers just like I did, Jen, that came out last week. I mean, it's staggering, the impact in southeastern Connecticut. And that's not just our direct employees, that's all of our indirect employees. Those are our vendors that we support. I mean, again, we did an economic study last year that showed that we contributed $1 billion back to the state's economy. That's just Foxwoods and Pequot alone. So you have to double that for Mohegan. And so that's just glaring when you look at the unemployment numbers for southeastern Connecticut. And that's hard to square for a lot of people in southeastern Connecticut when you look at the impact of the virus itself, being one of the least impacted regions. And that's because we took advanced actions, and primarily the tribes. We stepped up early on and said, we're all in this together. And the region took a hit for it, but we saved lives. But we've also taken a financial hit, as you pointed out. I mean, to shut down, it costs us several $1 million a week to stay shut down. And that's carrying employment and benefit, utilities, and just basic infrastructure costs.
What's it going to take to recover that? I mean, are you all really concerned about moving forward, or just, I would assume it would be anxious to reopen so you can start?
Yeah, a little anxious in both ways. Anxious because of the health concern, right? And we want to make sure we do it right, and we feel like we're doing it the right way, very, very cautiously. But, I mean, the economic impact, from what we're seeing, and I believe this is going to be the untold story that's going to start to unravel as this thing eases out. Once we get through this health crisis, it's going to be an economic crisis. There's a lot of businesses, in particular small businesses, that don't have the luxury that we have to be closed for 2 months, 3 months, or what have you. Even though there are some federal programs that have helped out, they haven't helped out enough. And there's going to be businesses that are going out of business, and those employees aren't going to have anywhere else to find jobs. And so there's this ripple effect of us being closed. And in our case, the millions of dollars that we're going through a week, you're never getting that back. We don't anticipate that when we open up, there's going to be this surge of volume that you're going to recapture 2 months of lost revenue. It's just not going to happen. And so we're going to have to eat that and figure out a way to move on. But we'll move on, and we'll figure it out, and we'll be better for it.
And Rodney, you all are in such a unique position because you are sovereign. So I would assume there's been no help from the federal government and you've had to deal with this on your own. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. And, and I'll give credit to the state. The state has been helpful, in looking at different ways that they could assist us and not financially, but just in guidance and working with the federal government. But the federal government did have a program for tribes that was based heavily on population. And between us and Mohegan being two of the smallest tribes in the country, we received very little federal support in comparison to the expenses that we're going through. So, I mean, we're still looking at the federal government to see if there's an opportunity in the next what they're calling the HEROES Act to get additional support for tribes like ours in the economies that we have. But as of now, it's been very limited.
Interesting. All right, let's go back to the phone conversation or the teleconversation that you had with Governor Lamont last Friday. I think it was 2 Fridays ago. I know that you spoke with him as well as the Mohegan Tribal Chair. Tell me what the tone of that conversation was like, because obviously the governor has one stance and then you all have a different stance on this.
Yeah, I think it's just a difference of opinions, and I don't want to say a lack of understanding. I think once cooler heads prevail, and the governor, which we've invited to both Foxwoods and to Mohegan Sun to look at our protocols, inviting the scientists, inviting the medical professionals to talk with ours, to challenge ours, quite frankly, and see what we can do better than what we're proposing and what we're implementing. I think once we get through all of that, we'll be fine. There was just a difference of opinion, and I think it correlates with, unfortunately, this unsaid bias that people have towards gaming. And our importance to the economy, and that's been said routinely over the last few weeks from various experts and committees that they underestimate the value, the economic value of gaming. And again, looking at those unemployment reports that we've all seen, it's very clear what the value is. So I think we'll get there. I mean, Ned's been open, and the governor's been open, and you can see that there's some compromise that he's willing to do, and I'm optimistic that once we walk through the plan and once he walks through our plans, he'll be comfortable with what we're doing.
Have you spoken to the governor since you all announced that you're going to be opening on June 1st?
No, I have not spoken with him directly.
And I know you had said you had invited him down. No response on that yet either?
No response yet. I mean, look, he's dealing with a lot of things right now. And so I'm not offended that he hasn't come down to Foxwoods yet. There's plenty of time. We're prepping for the next week and a half. And there's more than enough time for him and Dr. Coe and everybody to come visit us and walk through what we're implementing here.
All right. Rodney Butler with the Mashantucket Pequots. We really appreciate you coming on and giving us a long-form discussion about this issue, and please keep us updated. Come back on the program and tell us how the casino opening went as we go through this really unprecedented time of trying to get back to this new normal, I guess we'd call it.
Yeah, thank you, Jen. Appreciate that.
All right, have a good one. Stay safe. All right, coming up on The Real Story, we are going to continue to talk about the casinos reopening, and we are going to be bringing in Norwich Mayor Peter Nystrom. He's been critical of Governor Lamont. We'll talk with him and get his take on the casinos reopening. Coming up.